Picture this. You wake up to the deafening grind of concrete mixers, tearing apart a creek that's flowed behind your home since before the Civil War. Diesel fumes mix with the sharp scent of crushed limestone as you watch. $80,000 of homeowner fees vanish into what was once a crystal-clear mountain stream. It's for flood control. HOA President Carla Whitmore declares from her white Tesla, wearing a smug smile like she owns the horizon. What she didn't know. I'm a retired Army Corps hydrologist, and she had just built herself a disaster. Fast forward 6 months, Brenda's $1 million home is sinking in 2 feet of swamp water. Foundation cracking while my modest place stays bone dry. FBI's at her door, and that concrete channel she was so proud of, it's about to take everything from her. So I'll ask you, what would you do if your HOA used your money to destroy your peace? Where are you watching from? Bet you've got neighbors who've tried something just as outrageous. My name's Frank Lawson. I'm 58, and until half a year ago, I thought my biggest headache was finding carburetor parts for a 1971 Falcon Roadster. Turns out, I was wrong. The real threat came from an HOA president who thought a real estate license made her a hydroengineering expert. I inherited my grandfather's 2-acre slice of paradise in what used to be rural Redwood Valley back when Maple Ridge was cattle pasture and HOA stood for Herd of Angus. My grandfather, Edward Lawson, was a combat engineer who survived Normandy, came home, and built something beautiful. This creek was his therapy. For the past 3 years since retiring, my mornings have been the same. Coffee on the back porch, listening to Silverbrook Stream rush over smooth granite, the scent of motor oil from my workshop mixing with damp willow bark. My boots crunch over gravel paths my grandfather laid by hand in 1948. Helen, my wife of 26 years, teaches 4th grade patience of a saint, which she'd need for what was coming. Our kids? Sophie's a trauma nurse in Portland, a software engineer in Stonebridge. Both got my grandfather's stubborn streak. What made this place special wasn't the 1950s ranch house or my cluttered workshop full of vintage motorcycle parts. It was 400 yards of creek with water rights dating back to 1873, older than Redwood Valley statehood, older than electric lights, definitely older than certain suburban newcomers with superiority complexes. Then came Maple Ridge Estates, 47 houses, averaging $900,000.
Ow.
Sprouting like expensive mushrooms after a rainstorm. Most were California transplants running from their own HOA nightmares. The irony was thicker than morning fog over the creek. Enter Carla Whitmore, 52. HOA president, self-appointed ruler of perfect suburbia. Straight out of Bayshore County with that polished mix of entitlement and ignorance you only get from selling overpriced homes to desperate buyers. White Tesla, homes for us reading SOLD for you. Pearl earrings she wore like armor. Her husband's an investment banker commuting to North Haven. Her kids in private school, probably learning that folks like me are economically disadvantaged. Instead of simply having different priorities, they're $1.2 million colonial backs. Right up to my creek manicured lawn ending where the real wilderness begins. The first strike came on a Tuesday morning that smelled like fresh coffee and trouble. Official HOA violation notice. Certified mail. Unsightly storage of automotive parts visible from neighboring properties. Violates community aesthetic standards. Fine. $200 per day until compliance. I read it twice, laughing at the absurdity. Here's what Brenda's expensive attorneys didn't realize. My property predates their HOA by 80 years. The deed includes mineral rights, water rights, and an ironclad exemption from future restrictions. The face-to-face went exactly as expected. At her office smelled like vanilla candles and entitlement, with the kind of smile you practice in expensive mirrors. She suggested I might be happier living somewhere with more flexible standards. Translation: somewhere she thinks I belong. I sent her a certified letter outlining the law. Her retaliation was quick. Anonymous complaints to the county about illegal business activity. Apparently, fixing motorcycles is suspicious to people who pay others to change their oil. A building inspector crawled through my shop for 2 hours. Found nothing wrong except my filing system. It still cost me $1,200 in legal fees to prove. I wasn't running a chop shop, but that was just Brenda testing the waters literally. The real fight began when she discovered my water rights. In Redwood Valley, water is power, and in her world, someone like me, with calloused hands and an old family deed, didn't deserve it. That's when I knew this wasn't about motorcycle parts. This was war. That spring, snowmelt swelled Silverbrook Stream. The water sang louder than usual over the beaver dam upstream, mingling with the scent of wet willow and morning mist. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it became the soundtrack to Brenda's next brilliant legal move. She'd done her homework this time well. At least she thought she had. She hired Lawson and Grant LLP, a North Haven law firm specializing in what they politely call environmental property disputes. That's lawyers speak for finding creative ways to weaponize regulations against your neighbors. Their strategy? Elegant in its ruthlessness. File a nuisance water flow complaint with the county, claiming my property created dangerous runoff that threatened those precious million-dollar homes. Downstream, the legal papers landed on my porch one Thursday morning thick as a North Haven phone book and about as useful. 57 pages of technical jargon that boiled down to one thing: make the old guy prove his 150-year-old creek won't flood our clients' McMansions. The real goal was to force me into a $50,000 environmental impact study, the kind that takes 2 years, involves endless red tape, and requires hiring the same consultants who probably golf with their lawyers every weekend. That evening, Helen found me standing knee-deep in the creek, boots sinking into muddy banks, checking flow patterns with my grandfather's old surveyor's rod. "What are you thinking?" she asked, using that patient at Dangerous Elementary schoolteacher voice that means she smells trouble. "I'm thinking Brenda's lawyers just made a $50,000 mistake," said, watching the water curl around a boulder my grandfather placed by hand in 1953, and I'm thinking they picked the wrong retired engineer to mess with. See, here's the thing about 30 years with the Army Corps of Engineers. You learn that lawyers love complex environmental regulations because they assume regular people won't understand them. What they forget is that some of us actually designed the systems they're trying to regulate. It's like watching someone explain how your own car engine works to you. It's the guy who built it. I called my old colleague Pete Morrison at the Redwood Valley Water Authority. Took him 10 minutes to spot what Lawson and Grant LLP had missed. They'd based their entire complaint on watershed maps from 1967 before the interstate was built, before half the upstream subdivisions existed, before modern drainage systems completely reshaped the valley. Pete chuckled over the phone. "These maps show creek behavior that hasn't existed since Nixon was in office. Want me to send you the real surveys? This will be embarrassing for them," and it was. The modern geological data told a totally different story. My section of the creek didn't cause flooding. It prevented it acting as a natural retention zone during heavy spring runoff. Those granite boulders my grandfather placed weren't just pretty. They were a handcrafted flood control system decades ahead of its time. And here's where it got really interesting. Redwood Valley water law runs on something called prior appropriation doctrine, first served. My family's documented water use dated to 1873, which meant our rights outranked anything filed after that, including Brenda's subdivision, her HOA, and probably her great-grandchildren's future complaints. I spent that weekend in my workshop, surrounded by my grandfather's engineering notebooks and modern county survey maps, connecting the dots Brenda's lawyers completely missed. The air smelled of motor oil and old paper. My pencil scratched across graph paper like I was channeling the old man himself. Maybe I was. Monday morning, I filed my own complaint. Not just a defense, but a counterattack. I demanded that Brenda's HOA pay for a proper environmental assessment, since their case relied on outdated, misleading data. I attached Pete's analysis proving that their fancy development actually increased flood risk downstream. The county water commissioner, Rodriguez, a man who's been mediating water disputes since before Brenda knew Redwood Valley existed, took one look at my documentation and started laughing. "Mr. Brennan," he said, "these people just tried to lecture a hydrologist about water flow using maps from the Johnson administration. This might be the shortest water rights case in state history. 2 weeks later, complete vindication. The county sided with me on every point. ordered the HOA to stop all water-related harassment, and officially confirmed my historical water rights. My claims weren't just grandfathered anymore, they were carved into legal stone. The victory made the local paper. HOA challenges century-old water rights. Loses spectacularly. Suddenly, neighbors I'd never met were knocking on my workshop door, eager to share their own Brenda horror stories, fines for non-matching mailboxes, violations for unauthorized garden decorations, even threats over paint colors. That evening, Helen found me by the creek at sunset, holding my grandfather's fishing rod without any intention of casting a line. "This is where he taught me about water," I told her. "How it always finds the easiest path but never stops moving toward where it belongs." "And where does this water belong?" she asked. I smiled, listening to Silverbrook Stream babble. "Over stones that were here long before Brenda's HOA and would be here long after flowing. Right through the middle of her manicured kingdom. You'd think losing a water rights case would humble someone. You'd be wrong." Carla Whitmore clearly graduated from the school of doubling down on bad ideas. Her next move was so bold, it actually impressed me in the same horrifying way you'd be impressed watching someone jump off a cliff while screaming about their constitutional right to fly. 3 weeks after the county told her to back off, Brenda called an emergency HOA board meeting. Of course, she scheduled the meeting during the 1 week Helen and I had planned a long overdue vacation to visit Sophie in Portland, our first real break since this whole ordeal began. The notice was sent to an address we'd moved from years ago, conveniently ensuring we couldn't object to whatever fresh madness she had in mind. The agenda looked harmless on paper: emergency flood mitigation assessment. In reality, Brenda presented doctored photographs showing severe erosion on HOA. Property photos that looked suspiciously like the aftermath of someone taking a backhoe to the creek. She claimed her engineering consultant, actually her cousin's landscaping contractor, had determined that immediate concrete channeling was necessary to prevent catastrophic damage. The vote passed 6-1, with only Edwin Kowalski objecting. He called me in Portland that night, his Polish accent dripping with outrage. "Dale, this woman, she's a crazy person. Says flood will destroy everything if we don't put concrete in your creek. She has pictures, but it smells like fish left in sun too long." The HOA approved a special assessment, $1,800 per homeowner for $127,000. Emergency project that any real engineer could have told them was completely unnecessary. But Brenda had found her golden hammer, and suddenly, every problem looked like a nail that needed concrete. I cut our vacation short, driving through the night. Helen slept fitfully beside me while I gripped the wheel, calculating just how much destruction they could cause in 72 hours. The answer? It's far too much. The sound hit me first: jackhammers and diesel engines where morning birdsong used to live. Then came the smell: concrete dust mixing with crushed vegetation, diesel exhaust hanging heavy in the valley. I rounded the bend to my driveway and froze. My creek was gone. In its place stood an ugly concrete trench, a prison drain where a living waterway had once danced over smooth stones. They'd buried my grandfather's hand-placed boulders under tons of cement, destroying fish-spawning grounds that had existed since before Redwood Valley became a state. Helen stood beside me, tears streaking her cheeks. "They killed it," she whispered. "They actually killed a living creek." But here's the thing about being a hydrologist who spent 3 decades in environmental regulation: you learn to think like water, and water always finds the truth. I spent the next week documenting everything: photographs from every angle, water flow readings, chemical samples. Then I dug into Pinnacle Construction, the company behind the work. Their record: 3 EPA violations in 5 years. $75,000 in fines for unauthorized waterway modifications, and a habit of starting projects without proper permits. And here's what every property owner should know: any major modification to a natural waterway needs approval from the county, the state environmental agency, and often the EPA. It's like a legal 3-layer cake, wherein Brenda's crew had skipped all of them. The Clean Water Act doesn't play around. Federal fines can hit $25,000 per day. Redwood Valley can tack on another $10,000 daily. It's $35,000 a day. every day that concrete stayed in place. I filed complaints with every authority: County Code Enforcement, the State Environmental Agency, and the EPA's Region 8 office in North Haven. I also called Trout Unlimited. Their president nearly choked when he heard what had been done. "Mr. Brennan," said, "this is the exact habitat destruction we've been fighting for 20 years. We'll back you, legal support, expert witnesses, whatever it takes." Just declared war on every fish in Redwood Valley. The counterattack was swift. Within 10 days, 3 government agencies were investigating. The University of Redwood Valley's Environmental Law Clinic offered me free legal representation. Lawson and Grant LLP were about to be buried under more paperwork than they'd ever imagined. But Brenda wasn't done. Edwin warned me she was. Already pushing for the next phase, concreting the creek from the county road to the subdivision boundary, her reasoning: if we're going to do this, we might as well do it right. That night, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by my grandfather's engineering notebooks, studying his 1950s photos of the natural creek system. The man had built something beautiful, a design that had worked flawlessly for 70 years without a single flood. Brenda had destroyed it in 3 days, but she'd also just handed me a case loaded with enough federal violations to ruin her. If desperation has a smell, it's vanilla candles mixed with fierce sweat in a real estate office at 7 a.m. That's where I found myself 3 weeks later, across from Carla Whitmore, who was suddenly trying to rewrite history. She slid a manila envelope across the desk. "Dale," she said, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. This whole thing has been unfortunate." Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $500,000 and a non-disclosure agreement thicker than my grandfather's engineering manual. The deal was simple and as illegal as it gets. Take the money, agree never to talk about the creek situation again, move out of the county within 6 months, and sign over my water rights to the HOA for proper management. The threat wasn't even subtle. Legal battles are expensive, Dale. Even when you win, you lose. I do. Then she leaned in and said, "Think about Helen's job security." Luckily, I'd come prepared. In Redwood Valley, recording a conversation is perfectly legal with one-party consent. My tiny digital recorder was running. Brenda's next words were priceless. "If you don't take this offer, I'll make sure everyone in this valley thinks you're an anti-development extremist trying to tank property values." My real estate connections go deep. Your wife's teaching career could get complicated. That same week, my workshop was hit again. This time, they didn't bother hiding it. Vintage motorcycle parts scattered on the floor, tools stolen. My restored '72 Sportster tipped over with sugar dumped in the gas tank. But they made a mistake. My new security cameras caught everything, including a crystal-clear shot of a white Tesla parked at the end of my driveway at 2 a.m. The psychological warfare picked up speed. Anonymous online reviews slammed Helen's tutoring business. Unprofessional. Radical political agenda. Don't trust your children with her. Someone even called her principal to question her ability to teach. The stress was eating us alive. Helen losing sleep. Me checking my blood pressure twice a day. But here's the thing. Brenda didn't understand about engineers. We're methodical. Every threat, every vandalism, every nasty review got documented with the precision of a federal case file. And that's exactly what it was becoming. The EPA opened a formal investigation. The Redwood Valley Attorney General sent in their people. Environmental groups were treating this like a suburban Exxon Valdez. And my allies. They were multiplying. Faster than Brenda could make enemies, Sarah Olivia Dare, environmental law student, took my case for her senior thesis. While digging through HOA financials, she spotted something big, a pattern of inflated contracts, all connected to Brenda's real estate network. She spread the evidence across my workbench. This concrete project cost $127,000. It should have been $40,000 tops. The extra money disappeared into consulting fees and emergency contractor charges, all tied to companies owned by Brenda's associates. Sarah had found the smoking gun I'd only suspected. Secret board meetings. No competitive bidding. Special assessments, funding personal grudges. Then came the bombshell straight from my grandfather's 1973 consulting report for the county. Back then, he'd warned against putting a concrete channel in this exact spot, calculating it would raise downstream flooding risk by 300% during spring runoff. His report had charts, water tables, and soil absorption rates, all ignored by Brenda's expert. In other words, she hadn't solved a flood problem, she'd built a hydraulic time bomb. Spring snowmelt was 6 weeks away, and that concrete channel would funnel every drop of water straight into the foundations of million-dollar homes. My property? High, dry, and safe. Theirs? A submarine with screen doors. I spent the weekend with my calculator, my grandfather's, flowcharts, and current weather predictions. The math was brutal and beautiful when the floods came. Brenda's solution would turn a mild flow into a foundation-crushing torrent. That Sunday, my neighbor Edwin dropped by. "Dale," he said in his thick Polish accent, "this woman, Brenda, she is making a big mistake." I showed him the flood forecasts and my grandfather's notes. "Edwin," I said, "she just built the world's most expensive lawsuit. The creek's going to collect its debt. With interest." 3 weeks later, Sarah walked into my workshop carrying a banker's box full of documents, her face saying someone was about to have a very bad day. "Forensic accounting," she said. "Follow the money." And what she'd found would have made the FBI's white-collar crime unit weep with joy. $87,000 siphoned through shell companies with suspiciously familiar names. Brenda wasn't just wrecking my creek, she was robbing her neighbors blind. And then Edwin came back, clutching a small digital recorder like it held the secrets of the universe. "Dale," he said, "I told you I voted against the concrete project I maybe forgot to mention." I recorded the whole meeting. On the recording, Brenda's voice was crystal clear. The project wasn't about flood control. It was about driving out incompatible residents and forcing certain people into costly legal fights until they gave up. She'd weaponized HOA funds to erase anything rural or working class from the neighborhood. She didn't know it yet, but she just handed me the kind of evidence that ends careers and wins wars. She wanted to erase every trace of the area's ranching heritage, all to boost property values for her real estate empire. But the real shock came from a dusty folder buried in my grandfather's old engineering files. While sorting through his papers for the upcoming legal battle, I found one marked Maple Ridge Development. Consultation-1973. Inside was a complete hydrological analysis he'd prepared for the county warning. In no uncertain terms, against building any concrete channel in this exact spot. His calculations were razor-sharp, his warnings eerily prophetic. He predicted that channeling the creek would strip away its natural ability to absorb floodwaters, forcing 100% of the spring runoff straight toward the downstream development area. And in heavy snowmelt years, like the one we were having, the result would be catastrophic. Homes built in the natural floodplain, exactly where Brenda's house now sat, would suffer foundation-ruining floods. The report included detailed topographical maps, showing my property sitting naturally above the flood zone, while the HOA's land occupied the creek's overflow basin. Grandfather had urged the county not to build there, but in the 1990s, developers ignored him, reading his neat, careful handwriting felt like hearing his voice from the grave. The creek will reclaim its floodplain. Concrete will only make it angry when it does. Sarah laid out financial documents on my workbench while I spread grandfather's engineering reports beside them. Together, they told a chilling story. Brenda had embezzled nearly $90,000 from her neighbors to create a flood machine that would destroy their homes while keeping mine safe. "This isn't just shady," Sarah said, sorting the files into tidy legal stacks. "This is conspiracy, fraud, environmental destruction, possibly even racketeering. The EPA violations alone could send her to federal prison. Add in the financial crimes, and she's looking at years behind bars." Helen joined us, sipping coffee as she examined the evidence with a teacher's instinct for patterns. "She trapped herself," she murmured. "Every move she made to hurt you only created more evidence against her." Outside, February snow was melting faster than usual. Silverbrook Stream was swelling inside its concrete cage, Weather Service predicted the heaviest spring runoff in 2 decades. Brenda had built herself a ticking time bomb and handed me the evidence to detonate it. The only question was, do I warn her neighbors about what's coming? Or let physics deliver the lesson my grandfather predicted half a century ago? My workshop no longer looked like a motorcycle restoration garage. It looked like a war room designed by engineers who'd grown up on spy movies. Every surface was covered in maps, legal briefs, financial ledgers, and my grandfather's sketches. The coffee pot never cooled, the landline never stopped ringing, and Helen had started bringing trays of sandwiches for the steady stream of allies filing in. In the corner sat my fully restored 1971 Falcon Roadster, symbol of bringing dead things back to life, which felt fitting, given our plans for the creek. Kate Morrison, an environmental attorney from the University of Redwood Valley's legal clinic, had taken my case pro bono after reviewing Sarah's findings. Kate was the kind of lawyer who preferred fighting polluters over chasing ambulances. She approached environmental law like a chess grandmaster with a personal score to settle. "Dale," she said, unrolling a timeline across my workbench, "we're not fighting one case, we're fighting 4. And we're going to win every single one." Her plan was a masterpiece. Federal case: Clean Water Act violations, unauthorized habitat destruction. State case: water rights theft, permit fraud. County case: building code breaches, illegal HOA assessments. Civil case: fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and emotional damages. Each case backed up the others like overlapping fields of fire. Even if Brenda survived one, the rest would crush her. And thanks to the private attorney general doctrine, we could recover every cent in legal fees if we won. The financial investigation had grown into something both beautiful and dangerous. Sarah had recruited 2 law students and a forensic accounting professor who treated HOA fraud like a brain teaser. They uncovered 3 years' worth of inflated contracts for landscaping, security, legal consulting, all tied to Brenda's business circle. The total embezzlement now topped $200,000. That wasn't just local fraud. It was federal racketeering, with prison sentences measured in years, not months. Meanwhile, I was designing the creek's restoration using my grandfather's surveys and modern engineering. The natural channel design would stop floods and bring back fish habitats at a cost of $35,000, less than half of what Brenda wasted on her concrete disaster. Redwood Valley. Trout Unlimited pledged $25,000 to the project. The Sierra Club chipped in $15,000. Local anglers, environmental groups, and even remorseful HOA members joined what we were now calling the Silverbrook Stream Redemption Project. Weekly meetings drew 30 to 40 people, many veterans who liked seeing a combat engineer's grandson fight bureaucratic stupidity head-on. Helen ran the social media campaign. Save Silverbrook Stream already had over 5,000 followers. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, an environmental engineering professor from Redwood Valley State, volunteered as our expert witness. After reviewing my grandfather's notes, she confirmed their accuracy with modern modeling. The concrete channel increases flood risk by 400% during peak runoff. She told me, "Your grandfather was decades ahead of his time. This is exactly how we design natural flood control today." Brenda hadn't just damaged a creek, she had destroyed an intricate, self-sustaining system that protected the entire valley. Kate's office coordinated our media strategy. Local reporters loved the David versus Goliath narrative, but we kept the focus on protecting the environment and on personal revenge. The story spread beyond Redwood Valley into environmental law blogs, fishing magazines, even attracting a documentary crew from North Haven Public Television. But our most powerful weapon was still grandfather's historical evidence. His 1950s photographs showed the creek handling floods naturally for decades without harming a single home. In court, those pictures would be devastating proof. Concrete wasn't preventing floods, it was causing them. And now, with the mountains holding a heavy snowpack, spring temperatures running high, and storms lining up for the melt season, everything grandfather warned about was about to come true. The concrete channel was about to face its first True test stand, it was going to fail spectacularly. Our inside source, Dwin Kowalski, fed us updates from increasingly tense HOA board meetings. The remaining members were panicking over legal liability. 3 had already resigned, claiming they'd been misled about the project's legality. Then the chain reaction began. The federal EPA launched a formal investigation. The county district attorney opened a criminal probe into HOA finances. The state environmental agency issued an emergency cease and desist order. Multiple class action lawsuits were filed by other HOA victims across Redwood Valley. The timeline was now moving faster than the spring, SNOWMEL. Helen and I spent our evenings walking the creek, scarred and boxed in by concrete, mapping out how we'd bring it back to life. The sound of water straining against its unnatural prison. The sharp scent of curing cement in the mountain air. It was ugly, but only for now. How long until we can make it beautiful again? Helen asked. I factored in seasonal floods, legal hurdles, and construction schedules. By next spring, I said. More beautiful than grandfather ever imagined, assuming we survive this spring first. Desperation has its own smell, part cheap vanilla air freshener, part sharp sweat, and part the acrid burn of bridges set ablaze by someone too stubborn to admit defeat. That's what filled Brenda's real estate office at 6:47 a.m. on March 3rd, when she summoned me for what felt less like a meeting and more like a hostage negotiation. Dale? She began sliding an envelope across her glass desk. I've been thinking about our situation. Maybe we can reach a mutually beneficial solution. Inside was a cashier's check for $750,000 and a non-disclosure agreement worthy of a spy agency. Her terms: take the money, leave Redwood Valley, transfer my water rights to a conservation trust under HOA control, never speak publicly about creek restoration, environmental law, or HOA governance. The threat came next, thinly disguised. Legal battles destroy families. Ask Helen how her teaching career would survive if the school board learned about her husband's radical environmental activism. I'd brought my digital recorder, again perfectly legal in Redwood Valley. Her next words were pure prosecutorial gold. If you refuse this offer, I'll make sure every contractor, supplier, and business owner in this valley knows you're a troublemaker who costs people money. Your wife's tutoring business, your motorcycle hobby, your reputation, gone. I have connections you can't even imagine. That night, my workshop was hit again, but this time, they weren't just stealing. They were sending a message. My freshly restored 1972 Harley lay tipped on its side. The frame bent. 40 hours of restoration ruined in minutes. My grandfather's original engineering notebooks were scattered, some torn, others soaked in motor oil, but they'd made a critical mistake. The upgraded security system I'd installed after the first break-in caught everything in crisp, high-definition color. Methodically vandalizing my shop, a white Tesla with distinctive homes for us. Picking them up at 2:17 a.m., one vandal wore $300 sneakers identical to a pair I'd seen on Brenda's 17-year-old son. The harassment escalated into full-blown psychological warfare. Anonymous 1 star. Reviews slammed Helen's tutoring business. Unprofessional. Political indoctrination. Unsafe for children. Fake social media accounts spread lies about my military service, claiming I'd been dishonorably discharged for mental instability and violent behavior toward authority. The school principal called Helen in after receiving concerns about her husband's supposed erratic behavior. 3 parents canceled tutoring sessions after Anonymous. Letters labeled us as dangerous extremists in education. What? Brenda didn't understand about engineers? Is this we document everything? Every threat, every act of vandalism, every fake complaint went into a file system, meticulous enough to impress federal agents, and that's exactly who ended up with it. Agent Lisa Park, FBI White-Collar Crime Unit, opened a case into HOA financial fraud. Agent Tom Rodriguez, EPA Criminal Enforcement Division, built the environmental violations file. Sarah Olivia's forensic accounting laid out a roadmap to nearly $200,000 in embezzled HOA funds. The pressure was cracking Brenda's composure. Edwin reported that during one meeting, she screamed at 3 board members for betraying the community vision after they questioned legal expenses. 2 more resigned, leaving only Brenda and 1 loyal ally to run a subdivision in full-blown legal meltdown. Meanwhile, the snow melt was coming early and fast. March temperatures were 15 degrees above normal. The National Weather Service issued flood watches across the Front Range. Silverbrook Stream was already running at 150% of its usual seasonal flow and peak melt was still 6 weeks away. Spent my evenings taking flow measurements, watching the water rise, and documenting how the concrete channel strained under the pressure. The results were exactly what my grandfather's engineering had predicted. Instead of dispersing excess water across the natural floodplain, the concrete channel funneled the entire flow into a narrow, high-pressure stream aimed directly at the HOA homes. Dr. Rodriguez from Redwood Valley State ran computer simulations, showing that during peak floods, the channel's water velocity could actually undermine home foundations. Insurance companies had already started asking questions about the unauthorized alterations to natural drainage changes that could void flood coverage entirely. Community support was growing beyond anything I had imagined. Local businesses displayed Support Dale signs in their windows. The high school environmental club adopted creek restoration as their senior project. Veterans groups treated this like an attack on one of their own. Regional fishing and environmental organizations turned our fight into a symbol of grassroots resistance against corporate-style HOA control. But Brenda wasn't finished escalating. Edwin warned me she had something desperate planned for the next board meeting, possibly hiring private security to protect HOA assets, or even trying to get a restraining order, claiming I was a danger to the community. That night, Helen found me in the workshop, bent over my grandfather's flood calculations by lamplight. How bad is it going to be? I looked at snowpack reports, the channel's flow rates, and topographical maps showing exactly where that pressurized water was headed. Bad enough to end this for good, I said. At 5:23 a.m. on March 15th, the phone jolted me awake. Edwin's. The voice was low, almost whispering, like he was passing state secrets from his kitchen. Delu need to know. Brenda's packing a moving truck. Big one. Middle of the night. Very suspicious. I threw on clothes and drove past her house. Just as the sun painted the mountains gold, sure enough, a commercial moving truck sat in her driveway. Brenda supervised as expensive furniture was loaded, her Tesla already stuffed with personal belongings. The woman who'd spent 6 months trying to drive me out of the valley was now planning her own strategic retreat. But not before one final, desperate move, half genius, half madness. An hour later, Sarah Olivia called with news that made my coffee taste like battery acid. Mr. Brennan, Brenda just filed for an emergency restraining order, claims you've been stalking her family and making terrorist threats against HOA property. She's even asking for federal protection under anti-domestic terrorism laws. Legal paperwork was a masterpiece of fiction. In her sworn affidavit, I was a disgruntled military veteran with documented anger issues, conducting surveillance on HOA families and plotting to sabotage community infrastructure. She'd even submitted photos of me taking water flow measurements as evidence of suspicious reconnaissance. The hearing was scheduled for the exact day. Peak spring snowmelt would hit a coincidence or proof that Brenda knew exactly how bad things were about to get. That afternoon, my kitchen turned into a war room. Kate Morrison arrived with a legal brief thick enough to stop a bullet. Dr. Rodriguez brought real-time flood modeling data that painted a terrifying picture of what was coming. She's trying to keep you away from the creek until after flood season, Kate said. If she succeeds, there'll be no witnesses when those homes go under. The Weather Service had upgraded to a flash flood warning. Snow in the high country was melting faster than predicted, while multiple storm systems converged on Redwood Valley at the worst possible time. Silverbrook Stream was already running at 200% of normal, with the peak still days away, but Brenda had made one fatal mistake. The restraining order required her to appear in federal court and testify under oath, while prosecutors had recordings of her offering bribes, making threats, and intimidating witnesses. Agent Park from the FBI had been quietly building her case. For weeks following the money trail through Brenda's business network like a bloodhound with a badge, the embezzlement evidence was solid. Nearly $200,000 siphoned from homeowner dues through fraudulent contracts and kickbacks. Add in witness intimidation, bribery, and environmental violations, and Brenda was facing serious federal prison time. The night before the hearing, I sat in my workshop cleaning my grandfather's service revolver. Not because I expected troublesome rituals simply help you think. Outside, the creek roared. Spring melt had turned the concrete channel into a hypersure water cannon aimed at million-dollar foundations. Helen found me there at midnight. Flood predictions spread across the workbench. "Tomorrow changes everything, doesn't it?" she said. "One way or another," I replied, listening to the water rage against its concrete prison. Either the legal system works, or physics teaches the lesson. The media frenzy had reached a level usually reserved for political scandals or natural disasters. North Haven news stations were gearing up for live coverage of both the federal court hearing and the incoming flood. Environmental law blogs had turned my case into a symbol of citizen resistance against corporate-style HOA abuse. #ConcreteVSNature was trending nationwide. Sarah uncovered proof that Brenda's family had already purchased a home in Florida, clear evidence she was planning her escape before the legal hammer dropped. Bank records revealed liquidated investments, closed accounts, and asset transfers designed to hide her money from potential judgments. In other words, while she accused me of being a terrorist, she was quietly fleeing the state. That evening, Edwin stopped by with intel from the final HOA board meeting. Only Brenda and one remaining ally showed up. The rest was chaos, panicked homeowners demanding answers about flood insurance, legal liability, and voided foundation warranties. Several families had already filed lawsuits against the HOA over unauthorized modifications that destroyed their coverage. Dale, Edwin said, "This woman, she has made herself the enemy of everyone, even the people who voted for the concrete project now see she lied to them." The irony was perfect. She had spent months trying to turn the valley against me, but her greed had done the job for me. She'd isolated herself so thoroughly that even her former allies were now running for cover. Tomorrow, federal court would decide whether environmental law could protect citizens from HOA tyranny. But nature wasn't waiting. The spring melt was coming fast, and physics was about to deliver its own verdict. On March 22nd, the federal courthouse in North Haven was packed tighter than a sardine can. Overflow crowds watched live streams in the lobby, while news crews jostled for position. Outside, Judge Helen Blackwood, no relation, but with a reputation for hammering corporate polluters, presided over what the press had nicknamed the Creek War Trial. The gallery was a patchwork of environmental groups, veterans organizations, and families fighting their own HOA battles. Outside, Silverbrook streams swelled to dangerous levels. Inside, Brenda was about to learn that karma charges interest. Kate Morrison opened with surgical precision. "Your Honor, this case is about the systematic destruction of a century-old ecosystem, all to satisfy one woman's personal vendetta against a neighbor who refused to bow. The defendant didn't just break environmental law, she embezzled nearly $200,000 from her own community to fund that destruction." Brenda's lawyer, a visibly nervous associate from Lawson and Grant LLP, tried painting me as a radical environmentalist, blocking legitimate development. His argument collapsed when Kate played the recordings. Brenda's voice filled the courtroom, offering bribes, threatening Helen's career, and plotting to drive out undesirable residents to boost her real estate business. The gallery gasped. My testimony was simple: 30 years of flood control experience explained in plain language. I showed the judge my grandfather's 1973 engineering report predicting exactly what would happen if concrete replaced natural floodplains. Computer animations revealed how the channel funneled 4 times more water toward HOA homes during peak flow. Then Dr. Rodriguez took the stand. Armed with real-time flood data, "Your Honor, this installation has created an immediate public safety threat. Right now, as we sit here, water velocity in that channel is high enough to undermine foundations. The judge called a recess when the National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency. Officers evacuated the lower courthouse levels. Outside, emergency crews were scrambling as the storm hit. When court resumed, Brenda looked like she'd seen her own obituary. Her lawyer checked his phone every 30 seconds. That's when Kate dropped the hammer. "Your Honor, while we've been in session, the defendant's concrete channel has begun flooding the very homes it was meant to protect. Emergency crews are pumping basements in Maple Ridge Estates. Meanwhile, Mr. Brennan's upstream property remains completely dry." Helicopter footage confirmed the poetic justice, water backing up behind Brenda's concrete choke point.
Drowning million-dollar homes.
While my old workshop sat bone dry on higher ground, Brenda's meltdown was caught by every camera in the room. She accused me of controlling the weather, called the environmental groups eco-terrorists, and demanded federal protection. Judge Blackwood's voice cut through like a blade. "Miss Hartwell, control yourself or be held in contempt. The court has heard enough." During the lunch break, FBI agents served fresh warrants, seizing Brenda's financial records. EPA officers secured the construction sites as federal crime scenes. The Redwood Valley Attorney General's office rolled in with evidence of HOA fraud stretching across the state. The afternoon session, pure formality. The flood, the evidence. And Brenda's own words had already sealed her fate. Judge Blackwood ruled fully in my favor on every single count. Violations of the Clean Water Act, infringement of water rights, fraud, conspiracy, and even intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her orders were swift and decisive, immediate removal of every slab of concrete. Full creek restoration. And $750,000 in damages covering attorney fees and punitive awards. But her ruling did more than punish. Wrongdoing, it set a legal precedent. Protecting water rights from HOA overreach and giving other homeowners a blueprint to fight back against the same kind of abuse. Outside the courthouse, the press conference felt more like a celebration. Environmental lawyers called it a landmark case. Veterans groups presented me with a community service award. Students from the high school environmental club handed Helen hand-drawn thank you cards. Still, the real victory wasn't in the headlines or the legal precedent. That evening, while emergency crews pumped flood water out of Brenda's basement and contractors prepared to free my grandfather's creek,
I stood on the back porch
with Helen. We listened to water flowing where it belonged. Justice sounds like running water, she said. For the first time in months, that water ran free. 6 months later, Silverbrook's stream was unrecognizable. Where lifeless concrete had once imprisoned the flow, a natural channel now wound through restored banks. Lined with willows and wildflowers blooming like nature's own celebration, the sound that woke me each morning was no longer the harsh scrape of water against concrete. It was the gentle murmur of a creek, remembering how to be itself again. The restoration became a community project my grandfather would have been proud of. Local contractors donated equipment and labor. High school students planted native vegetation for their biology project. Even a few guilt-ridden former HOA members showed up with shovels and checkbooks. The sharp smell of concrete dust and diesel exhaust was replaced by fresh earth and clean mountain water. Helen and I spent our evenings walking the renewed banks, watching native trout return to spawn in gravel beds long buried under concrete. Children now fish where a barren channel once scarred the land. It had become even better than my grandfather's vision, because it was reborn through the hands of an entire community. The ripples spread far beyond. Maple Ridge Redwood Valley's legislature passed what environmental groups nicknamed Dales, law strengthening property rights against HOA abuse and requiring environmental impact studies before altering natural waterways. Law schools from Stanford to Harvard began teaching the Brennan Creek case as a model for citizen-led environmental enforcement. Financially, justice was complete. The $750,000 judgment funded full restoration, covered all legal fees, and still left enough to create the Edward Lawson Environmental Engineering Scholarship at Redwood Valley State University. The first recipient, Sarah Olivia, fresh out of law school, now working in the EPA's Enforcement Division, carrying forward the fight. Brenda's downfall was almost anticlimactic after the courtroom fireworks. She pled guilty to federal fraud, serving 18 months in a minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of probation and full restitution to the HOA victims. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, her assets seized, and her family quietly relocated to Florida, where they avoid talking about their Redwood Valley years. The concrete company owner received 2 years in prison and $2 million in environmental fines. 3 former HOA board members got probation and community service, most of it spent restoring waterways across the state. Edwin Kowalski was elected HOA president unanimously, implementing new bylaws that required environmental review for all future projects. But the real change wasn't in court records, it was in people. Maple Ridge transformed from a gated collection of strangers into a genuine neighborhood. The annual Creek Festival now draws thousands, showing what grassroots activism can accomplish when people decide they've had enough. My workshop returned to its original purpose, restoring vintage motorcycles and teaching local kids about engines, water flow, and why you never back down from bullies. Its walls are now covered in thank you letters from homeowners fighting similar battles nationwide, along with requests for advice and invitations to speak at environmental conferences. Helen went back to teaching, weaving watershed protection and citizen activism into her curriculum. Her students' science fair creek restoration projects went on to win regional awards and catch the attention of university researchers studying community-driven solutions. The Silverbrook Stream Redemption Project is now a model replicated in dozens of towns where HOAs or developers have damaged waterways. Federal agencies even use our case and training programs, proof that citizen enforcement can succeed where underfunded. Agencies sometimes cannot. Just last week, I got a call from a homeowner in Arizona facing the same battle, her HOA trying to choke a creek with concrete. As I listened to her story, I knew one thing for certain. Our fight was far from over. Embezzled funds, intimidation campaigns. I began to realize this fight was about far more than a single creek in Redwood Valley. Helen and I have been thinking about turning our workshop into a resource center, a place where other communities can learn how to defend their environment and stand up for what's right. But for now, it's enough to sit on the back porch at sunset, listening to Grandfather's Creek sing its timeless song, while Helen reads letters from supporters all across the country. Home isn't just where you live, it's where your values are protected and your community grows stronger. So here's my challenge to you. If you've got your own HOA nightmare brewing, share it in the comments below. You might be surprised at how many legal paths are open to you when small-time power plays threaten something worth protecting. And make sure you hit that subscribe button, because next week we're covering the wild case of the HOA that tried to ban vegetable gardens, and the 73-year-old grandmother who fought back using the Constitution. And sometimes the best way to beat bullies is with patience, preparation, letting nature take back what was always hers. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on HOA Stories, where overreaching HOA boards finally meet accountability. If you enjoyed today's episode, tap that like button, drop a comment with your favorite moment, and subscribe so you're first in line for our next HOA showdown.